Happy Easter. I'm Father Jim Bretzke and I teach theology at John Carroll. This is my first year here, and I am speaking to you from the Jesuit Community Chapel Shell House, which is across the street from John Carroll. I suspect many of you have never been in our chapel, but we have here behind me a bas-relief that centers on the founder of the Jesuits, St. Ignatius of Loyola, and sort of his pilgrimage through life to found the Society of Jesus, and then different places that are key to the Society of Jesus, including up here, a representation of the administration building at John Carroll. Every year during our Holy Week liturgies that conclude with Easter Sunday, which we're celebrating today, the world tries to enter into the drama of the Passion Week, the life, the death, the suffering, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But this year, with the COVID-19 epidemic, it seems that our world, if not turned upside down, has at least been turned inside out. And maybe we feel that this year we have not been able to celebrate Holy Week in the way in which we are accustomed. Somehow we feel that maybe we just haven't been able to do it right. And I think there is a message here for us maybe this year about what it means to celebrate the Holy Week in a right way. One way of this, I suppose, is to look at the Holy Week as a script that we started with Palm Sunday, commemorating Jesus' entry into Jerusalem and going through the Last Supper on Holy Thursday, the Passion and the Death on Good Friday, and then finally concluding with that mini earthquake that rolled the stone of his tomb aside to announce his victory over death and his resurrection. And sometimes the liturgies themselves kind of go back and we're trying to do it the way Jesus did it. But this year we can't do that, not just because of social distancing, but because in a very real way, we can't go back in time, we can only go forward. When I was a little kid, I used to dream of the possibility of seeing the annual Passion play that was put on in my mother's native South Dakota in the Black Hills. And later on, I learned of an even more important or prestigious Passion play that was portrayed on a big plaza, kind of mountain in front of St. Joseph's Oratory in Montreal called Mont Royal. Yet, the Passion play is, I think, backwards looking. When I was doing my doctorate in Rome, a movie came out called Jesus of Montreal, and the story of that movie is going to be what I'm going to try to relate to you today. So if you ever want to see the movie and be surprised by it, stop listening now because there's going to be a few spoiler alerts. One of the things that the movie starts off with is they take that old Passion play that had been going on for years and years at St. Joseph's Oratory, and the priest in charge was losing the public. Ticket sales were dropping, and there wasn't much interest in it anymore. And so he hired a young, kind of avant-garde director, who in the movie is called Daniel, to breathe new life into the play, to kind of redo it in a different fashion. And Daniel is very successful in rewriting the script and gaining a bunch of new actors to play the parts of the disciples. And it becomes a little bit controversial because it is not, quote unquote, orthodox. And that's the part of the story that I'm going to leave aside, because the bigger part of the movie, in my view, is not what happens to the Passion play so much as what happens to the actors who are involved in the Passion play. What they do, bit by bit, is engage in what I think people in the theater will call method acting. Method acting is a way of trying to get into your character so much that your character becomes more you, that you identify so completely with with your character that you really do take on his or her life role. And that's what happens to Daniel and his fellow actors. They become very much like Jesus. They become like Mary. They become like the other disciples. And in doing so, in the method of that acting, they look back on their own lives and they see it in a very different way. Not that they were doing evil things before, but they were doing things that were too much, perhaps in their view, according to the standards of the world and not the standards of the play that they were now acting out. Now here's where there's another little spoiler alert. So the play goes on and it becomes controversial, and ultimately the priest who was trying to put the play forward is told by the Bishop of Montreal to shut it down. This is not the way they want to do it, that this is too avant-garde. And the police come to try to shut it down, and it's an outdoor play and people are gathered all around as they go from station to station to station. And in the course of this conflict, this literal tug of war between the police, the crowd, and the actors, a big accident occurs. And what happens is Daniel, who is up on the cross, and the people are milling around and shoving and pushing and pulling, the cross falls, and he is really hurt. And his friends take him in an ambulance, and they want to try to take him to the hospital to be treated. And it's one snafu after the other. This hospital's closed down, this one's not taking new patients, the other one will turn people away. But eventually they get him to one Catholic hospital. And while he is there, he goes into the ER waiting room and he's not attended to. He doesn't have the right papers or the right card, or people think he's not hurt enough, and so he is neglected, he is marginalized, he is cast down on the side. And eventually, in this hospital, he seems to recover enough, and so since he's not getting any care in that hospital, the friends of his take him with them back home, and they're taking the metro, the subway in Montreal. And while they're waiting for the train in the subway station, he collapses again. And so once again, we have another ambulance chase going from one hospital to another. And eventually, the only hospital where there is room for him is a Jewish hospital. And so he goes into the Jewish hospital, and they see that he really needs care. And there is none of this previous, well, where's your insurance card, and who's the next of kin, and who's gonna pay, and all of that. They immediately go in and they treat him. But, very sadly, he does not survive. And you see in the ICU, the brain monitor going flat. And it really is death. His friends, of course, are distraught. And the nurse comes up and asks the friends, well, who is the next of kin? And they said, well, to the best of our knowledge, there is no next of kin. Daniel has no family. He has no parents or siblings that we know of. And so the nurse asked them, well, would there be any possibility, would you give permission that maybe the parts of his body that are still viable, that these could be donated to others who are suffering? And so the friends give permission, and you see the different, little containers with dry ice and what have you, with this organ or that organ, leave the hospital and go to different parts of the world. And the movie concludes with sort of an around the world scene where you see a woman in Italy who had been blind has now been given an eye transplant from Daniel, and she wakes up and she says, I can see. And then another part of the world where a man who had been dying from heart disease has now a new heart, a new chance at life. And I think that this is, of course, very moving, but I think it also gives us a deeper truth to celebrating not this Holy Week, but each and every Holy Week. That at the end, on Easter Sunday, the world is not going to be perfect. Jesus is not going to come in the fullness of his kingdom in 2020 or 2021 or 2022. But bit by bit, if we can support him with our own method acting, with taking on his values, his ministry, his cares, his concerns, concretely, in ways that we can look to, how is it that we can support someone who is suffering, someone that we might see up close, or how is it that we can be more attentive emotionally to whole groups of people that are marginalized, cast out by the powers that be, vilified even, being accounted of no worth, or not trying to make our country or anything else great. And if we can do that, if we can enter into the method of Jesus's madness, then certainly more completely this Easter and next Easter, God's kingdom will be coming. And that, I think, is a message that we maybe can take away this particular Easter. And so I'd like to conclude with where I began by returning to this bas-relief of St. Ignatius. I don't know if you can see the little message on it, but I'm going to read it out here because I think it is a good concluding message for us all. Take care never to close your heart to anyone. And that certainly is the message of St. Ignatius. It is the message of Jesus, who is our Christ. And God willing, it is also the message of John Carroll. So happy Easter, and thank you all.